Hi.
Who are you?
Hello, I'm Anne Pickering. I've worked for years with people with various levels of mental health problems. I've worked with adults, I've worked with children, I've worked with families, I've worked with people in forensic services who've maybe committed crimes due to, not feeling in control and various circumstances, and worked more recently with children and young people.
Okay. What experience have you had assisting people with emotional regulation?
I've done a lot of work with young people who have a big problem with emotional regulation, most latterly those who've experienced some form of trauma or have had ongoing difficulties with relationships within their family of origin. One of the big things about emotional regulation is if you haven't got it, you may have all the skills in the world to give to the world, but the emotional regulation really gets in the way of you actually putting that into practice, because things in your environment may be triggering lots of fear, lots of anger, or other emotions, and it actually stops us from actually our brains working properly.
Okay. Why is it important?
It's important because, as I said, you can have the most amazing gifts to give the world, and your emotional regulation kind of gets in the way. So this means that your brain doesn't work properly, and that's how I explain it to children and young people, that you may have the most wonderful brain in the world. I meet a lot who will say, I feel like I'm going mad, I just can't think, I may be really good at maths, and then I get into the exam and it doesn't work properly, and I'll say that doesn't mean that you're going mad, it just means that your brain is naturally going into fight flight. And a lot of people learn about fight flight, but what they aren't taught is that it means that part of their brain has stopped working, which is the frontal lobes, and I will actually draw that out and say it's as if a switch has switched it off. And I explained this to an 8-year-old who just sat there and went, so that's why I can't do the maths, in the exam situation. And it was like a revelation to her that actually her brain was working properly and as it should, and it was perfectly normal for it to switch off in a stressful situation. So it's great to kind of link that biology with the sort of psychology of it, and the fight flight with the adrenaline and all that is happening.
Okay. How do you help others?
What I do is teach them that bit about how the brain works and how it switches off, but the key thing, I think, especially in certainly with our education system, it tends to be very taught quite rigidly in some aspects. So there's lots of worksheets being done, and it's very general. So I think a key thing here is to actually personalise what you're doing. So, for example, if somebody is really into football, I work with a lot of young boys who are into football. If I'm to say to them, well, actually, a lot of sports stars use these relaxation methods to actually switch their brain back on, they're going to relate to that better than me saying, hey, learning relaxation is an ancient yogic technique that people use to, sort of control their bodies. They're just going to switch off because they're not going to relate to that. But if I tell them that and use Lionel Messi as an excellent example of a footballer who can keep control and manages not to bite people's ears, often things like, I think it was Suarez who did that recently, using those examples of emotionally deregulated footballers, and then one that actually is calm and can hold it together and be the best footballer in the world, in my opinion at the moment. They can relate to that, And with the girls, if they like, pop stars, would talk about that, talk about ones who've maybe gone off the rails, had difficulties come through it. And so it's making it real, it's making it relevant. And we're also recognising that different people have different ways of relaxing. So some people will relate to an active method of relaxation. So there, I would teach somebody to maybe visualise an active scene. If they're a bit on, sort of hyperactive, they're not going to want to learn to imagine a tranquil scene. That will not relate to how they are. So I have actually, taught quite an active boy to have an active skateboarding visualisation to help him to feel calmer.
Mm-hmm.
So it's fitting the method with the individuals that you find and their circumstances.
Okay. Do you have any examples of how people have put this into practice?
Yes, there was the boy who was very much into a very famous American skateboarder, Tom Hartman. So I looked him up on YouTube, and he'd modified an old swimming pool into a skateboarding park. And so together we wrote a positive visualisation of him, visualising him doing some moves like Tom Hartman, and I learned a lot about skateboarding as we did it.
Okay. What results can we expect?
People can learn to step back and get into what we call the observing self instead of actually being in a situation. And it teaches young people, that they can control their behaviour. So just teaching somebody how to either visualise, or if they're not very good at visualising, drawing with them a positive scene and noticing how they feel when they focus on that, can give a greater sense of control, especially if they're used to being in a situation where things are done to them. And I think this is particularly relevant where children have been abused or traumatised. So giving that message, it doesn't even have to be straightforward telling somebody, but showing them through example that they can actually affect how they feel. One example I tend to use is, think of your favourite food. Notice how you start to salivate as you think of that food with the anticipation. And now think of a lemon. And people can relate to that.
Are there any common misconceptions that can get in the way?
Yes, I think very often people think that sort of relaxation and meditation and visualization are all things that people from other cultures do. That it's something mystical. That it's something that you have to do for an hour at a time. The number of people I've met who said, I would like to practice relaxation, but I can't do it for long enough. So there's that stereotype of the serene person shutting themselves off and doing it for hours and hours. So teaching that even just a few moments and building on that can really help. Another misconception I've come across is the idea that just because you have murderous thoughts, it means you're going to carry it through. I think sometimes professionals panic when young people maybe draw drawings of horrible things that they'd like to do. And I think that the most reassuring thing is that it is very common for people who are feeling out of control and done to and don't have a lot of power to have violent thoughts and fantasies, and just telling people that is common and it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do it brings a huge amount of relief. I did work with a 15-year-old boy who was scaring himself silly, thinking that all his murderous thoughts meant he was going to do something, and he actually worried that he might be a psychopath, and he avoided mental health service for a very long time because he thought we would sit and say, yeah, you're a psychopath. And when I shared a list of common upsetting thoughts, that he found that so validating. So, you know, normalising his experience was the biggest factor in all the time that I spent with him. And the sense of relief on his face when I just read the common upsetting thoughts was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.